I moved back into my mother's house in late October. I say moved back, but it was supposed to be temporary. My mother was 78 then, and she had started having trouble with her balance. Nothing dramatic. No sudden diagnosis. No major fall that changed everything overnight. It was more like a slow collection of small problems. She forgot whether she had taken her blood pressure medicine. She left the stove burner on twice. She started sleeping in the recliner because walking to the bathroom from her bedroom made her nervous at night. My brother lives in Arizona, and I'm divorced with no kids, so it made sense for me to stay with her for a while. That was how everyone phrased it. For a while. Her house was the house I grew up in, a one-story brick ranch on the edge of a quiet neighborhood outside Knoxville. It sat on a half-acre lot, with woods behind it and older homes on both sides. Most of the people on that street had lived there for decades. It was not the kind of place where you worried much about crime. People forgot to lock cars. Packages sat on porches all day. If somebody's trash can blew into the road, someone else would drag it back. The house had 3 bedrooms, a small laundry room off the kitchen, and a crawl space that ran under the whole place. The crawl space entrance was outside, on the back side of the house behind the laundry room. It was one of those low metal doors with a sliding latch and a padlock. I remembered being afraid of it as a kid. Not because anything had happened there, just because it was dark, low, and smelled like wet dirt. When I first moved in, I spent the first week organizing. I cleaned out the fridge. I changed the batteries in the smoke detectors. I put nightlights in the hallway and bathroom. I added a motion sensor light over the driveway because my mother kept saying she could not see when she came back from doctor appointments after dark. There was already a porch light by the back door. It was an old fixture with a frosted glass cover, and it lit up the concrete patio, the trash cans, and part of the backyard. I started leaving it on every night. My mother asked me not to. She said it shined through the laundry room window and made it hard for her to sleep in the recliner, so I changed the bulb to a lower wattage one. That seemed to solve it, at least for a few nights. The first thing I noticed was the bulb. One morning I went out back to throw away coffee grounds, and the porch light bulb was hanging loose in the socket. Not fallen out. Not broken. Just unscrewed enough that it would not turn on. I thought maybe I had not tightened it when I changed it, so I screwed it back in and forgot about it. 2 nights later, it happened again. That time, I knew I had tightened it. I remember standing there in my slippers, holding a bag of trash, staring up at the light fixture. The bulb was turned out about 4 full rotations. I could see the metal threads. I looked around the patio. Nothing was missing. The trash cans were there. The back door was locked. The yard was quiet. The woods behind the house were still dark except for a few porch lights from the next street over. I told myself it was vibration from the door closing. Old fixture. Loose socket. Something simple. But then the trash can started moving. We had 2 big plastic trash cans, one green and one blue. They were kept against the brick wall beside the laundry room window. One morning, the green one was pulled away from the wall and positioned directly under the bathroom window. Not tipped over. Not dragged halfway across the yard. Just placed there. The bathroom window was small and high, with frosted glass. It had a screen, and it opened outward with a crank. It was not big enough for most adults to climb through, but a thin teenager probably could have managed it. That was my first real thought. A teenager. Not a burglar, not some stranger. Just a kid sneaking through the yard. The neighbors to our left had a grandson who stayed with them some weekends. He was maybe 16 or 17. I had seen him cut through yards before with headphones on, probably going to meet friends on the road behind us. I did not know his name. He seemed harmless. But the trash can under the window bothered me. I moved it back and made sure the bathroom window was locked. That night I checked the porch light before bed. It was on. At around 2 in the morning, I woke up to my mother calling my name, not yelling. Just saying it from the living room. I got up and found her sitting in the recliner with the TV on mute. She said she heard something outside. I asked what kind of something. She said, "Just a bump." I checked the back door, locked. I looked through the laundry room window. The porch light was off. I remember feeling annoyed before I felt scared. That was the first honest reaction I had. Annoyance. I was tired. I had work in the morning. My mother needed help getting to the bathroom twice a night. And now some kid was messing around in the yard. I turned on the kitchen light and stepped into the laundry room. The window over the washing machine looked onto the back patio. At first, I could only see my own reflection. Then I cupped my hands around my face and leaned closer to the glass. The trash can was under the bathroom window again. I did not go outside. I locked the kitchen door deadbolt, even though it was already locked, and I told my mother it was probably a raccoon. She did not argue, but she did not go back to sleep either. The next morning, I walked the yard. The ground was soft from rain earlier that week, and there were marks near the trash cans. Not clear footprints, just flattened grass and mud smears on the patio. I checked the crawl space door. The padlock was still there. The latch looked closed. I shook it. It did not move. I went next door that afternoon. The neighbors, the Hensleys, were an older couple. They were polite, but not especially warm. I asked Mrs. Hensley if her grandson had been around the past few nights. She said no. He had not visited in almost a month. I asked if she had noticed anyone cutting through yards. She looked behind me at my mother's house and said, "No, but we don't look out much after dark." That was the end of that conversation. I ordered 2 cheap security cameras online the same day. They were the kind that connected to Wi-Fi and recorded motion clips. One for the back porch, one for the driveway. They arrived 3 days later. Until then, I started checking the yard every morning. The porch bulb was unscrewed twice more. The trash can was moved once, and on the 5th morning I found the footprints. They were inside the house. Not far inside, just on the laundry room floor. I had gone in there to put towels in the wash, and I saw 4 damp prints on the old linoleum. Barefoot. Or maybe socks. They were not muddy exactly, more like wet, dirty outlines. Heel, arch, toes. They started near the back door and faded toward the kitchen. I stood there with the basket against my hip, trying to understand what I was seeing. The back door was locked. The deadbolt was locked. The chain was on. I checked it every night. I still do. I checked the door frame. No damage. No pry marks. No broken glass. Nothing. I called my brother. He told me not to panic. He said old people sometimes forget things, and maybe Mom had opened the door. I told him Mom could barely get out of the recliner without her walker. He said maybe I had opened it and forgotten. That made me angry enough to hang up. But later, after I calmed down, I started thinking about it. I was tired all the time. I was getting up twice a night. I was working remotely during the day and caring for my mother in between calls. There were hours that felt smeared together. Maybe I had opened the door. Maybe I had taken something out. Maybe the prints were mine. I wear slippers, but maybe. That was how I explained it to myself. When the cameras came, I set them up right away. The back porch camera pointed at the door, the light, and the trash cans. I felt better as soon as I saw the view on my phone. For 2 nights, nothing happened. The camera caught a possum near the fence. It caught leaves blowing across the patio. It caught me taking trash out at 8:14 p.m. On the 3rd night, it stopped recording at 1:37 a.m. The last clip showed the porch light on and the trash cans against the wall. The next clip was at 6:02 a.m. In that clip, the porch light was off. The bulb had been unscrewed again. The green trash can was under the bathroom window. And the camera angle had shifted downward, so most of the frame showed the concrete patio. I checked the camera mount. It had been turned by hand. Not broken, just twisted. I remember feeling very still when I realized that. Someone had walked up to the back porch camera, reached above it, and moved it away from the house. They had done it quietly enough that neither my mother nor I heard anything. I called the sheriff's office that morning. 2 deputies came out around lunch. They were both younger than me, which for some reason made me feel embarrassed. I showed them the camera clips. I showed them the trash can. I showed them the laundry room floor, even though the prints were long dried and gone. They walked around the house and checked the windows. One of them looked at the crawl space door and asked if anyone ever went under there. I said no. He asked if I had the key to the padlock. I had to look for it. It was in a drawer with old batteries and curtain hooks. The deputy opened the lock and pulled the crawl space door. It stuck at first. Then it opened about 6 inches and stopped against something. He looked at the other deputy. Then he pulled harder. There was a scraping sound. He shined his flashlight inside. I was standing back by the patio near the trash cans. I could smell the crawl space from there, that damp, mineral smell. Old insulation, wet dirt. The deputy crouched and said, "There's some stuff in here." My first thought was animals. A nest. Maybe raccoons had dragged trash under the house. Then the second deputy told me and my mother to go inside. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table by then, wrapped in her blue robe. She looked small and tired. I helped her back to the recliner. She asked what they found. I said I did not know. She watched me for a second and then said, "Maybe it's him." I thought she meant the neighbor's grandson. I said, "Who?" She looked toward the hallway. Then she said, very quietly, "The man who talks at night." I did not understand her at first. I asked what man. She said, "He talks through the vent." I still remember the way she said it. Not scared. Not confused. Just tired. Like she had been meaning to bring it up but did not want to make trouble. I asked her what vent. She pointed toward her bedroom, even though she had not slept in there for weeks. "There," she said, "by the floor." The bedrooms in that house had old metal floor vents for the heat. They connected to ductwork in the crawl space. I asked her when she had heard it. She said, "Some nights." I asked what he said. She shook her head. Not to me exactly. I sat on the edge of the coffee table in front of her. I asked again, "What did he say, Mom?" She looked embarrassed. Then she said, "Mostly names." I felt cold in a very ordinary way. Not like in movies. More like when you realize you left your wallet somewhere and your body understands before your mind catches up. I asked, "What names?" She said mine first, then hers. Then my brother's. She said sometimes the voice would whisper my name from her bedroom while she was in the recliner. She thought it was the TV at first. Then she thought maybe she was dreaming. Then she started keeping the recliner light on. I asked why she had not told me. She gave me the same answer parents always give when they need you more than they want to admit. "I didn't want to worry you." Outside, one of the deputies called for the other one to come closer. I walked to the kitchen window. They had both backed away from the crawl space opening. One was speaking into his radio. The other had a hand on his belt and was looking toward the woods. I locked the kitchen door. I do not know why. It was daytime. There were deputies 10 feet away, but I locked it. A few minutes later, one of them came inside and asked us to sit in the living room. He asked if anyone else had keys to the house. I said my brother, but he lived out of state. My mother said the Hensleys had one for emergencies years ago, but she was not sure if they still did. He asked if any work had been done under the house recently, plumbing, cable, pest control. I said no. He asked if we knew anyone named Mark. My mother said she had a cousin named Mark, but he had died in 2009. The deputy wrote that down. I asked what they found. He hesitated. Then he said there were blankets under the house, a water bottle, food wrappers, some clothing. He said it looked like someone had been staying there. I asked if someone was there now. He said they did not think so. That was not the same as no. More deputies came. Then a man from animal control came for some reason, though I never saw him do anything. They had us wait in the front yard while they went through the crawl space. My mother sat in a lawn chair in the driveway. Neighbors came outside and pretended to check mailboxes. I stood beside her with my arms crossed, feeling exposed in front of the house I had lived in as a child. At some point, Mrs. Hensley walked over and asked if everything was okay. I told her the sheriff's office was checking something under the house. She looked confused. Then she said, "Under the house?" I asked if they still had a key. She said she would check. She came back 20 minutes later with an old brass key on a red plastic tag. It was our key. My mother had given it to them after my father died, in case she locked herself out. Mrs. Hensley said they kept it in a little dish by their garage door. She said their cleaning lady, their son, and their grandson all knew where that dish was. I gave the key to the deputy. He put it in a small evidence bag. I never heard whether it mattered. Later that afternoon, they let me look inside the crawl space from the opening. They would not let me go in. I did not want to. From the doorway, I could see the beam of a flashlight sliding over the dirt. The crawl space was not tall enough to stand in, maybe 3 feet at the highest point, less in some areas. The ground was bare earth covered in plastic sheeting in patches, but a lot of the plastic had been pushed aside. Near the entrance, there were 2 old moving blankets folded into a narrow pad, a clear water bottle, a crushed sleeve of crackers, a pair of gray socks. Farther back, under the section of the house where the bedrooms were, the dirt had been worn smooth, not everywhere, just in one narrow path, like someone had crawled the same route over and over. From the crawl space door toward the laundry room plumbing, then under the hallway, then branching toward the bedrooms. The deputy pointed his flashlight toward one of the metal ducts. He said one of the vent covers inside the house had loose screws, the one in my mother's bedroom. They believed someone had been removing it from below, or at least pushing up against it. I asked how long someone had been under there. The deputy said he could not tell me. I asked how they got in if the padlock was locked. He showed me the latch. The screws holding the hasp to the wooden frame were loose. One side could be pulled outward just enough for the latch to slip free while the padlock remained closed. From a distance it looked locked. If you shook it quickly, it felt locked, but it could be opened. I had shaken it myself. I had stood right there and decided it was secure. That detail bothered me more than almost anything. They searched the woods behind the house. They checked the neighbors' yards. They took the blankets and bottle and wrappers. One deputy asked if he could take the trash can too, but his supervisor said photos were enough. By evening, they were gone. They told us to stay somewhere else if we could. So I took my mother to a hotel near the interstate. She complained about the bed. I stayed awake most of the night watching headlights move across the curtains. The next morning, my brother flew in. He was angry in the way people get angry when they are scared and were not there to help. He asked why I had not called him sooner. I told him I had. He checked us out of the hotel and said we were not going back to that house until everything was fixed. We hired a locksmith. We hired a handyman to replace the crawl space door with a metal one that bolted from the inside and outside. We put bars on the basement vents, even though the house did not have a basement. That was what the receipt called them, vent security bars. We replaced every exterior light. We added more cameras. For a while, the house looked like someone was expecting trouble. Maybe we were. The sheriff's office never identified the person, at least not in any way they told us. The water bottle had no useful prints. The blankets were old and could have come from anywhere. The food wrappers were common brands. They did say the person was probably not living there full time, more likely coming and going, maybe sleeping there on some nights, maybe hiding there during others. That did not make me feel better. My mother asked twice if the man had been arrested. I told her no. She stopped asking. About a week after we came back, I cleaned her bedroom. She had not slept in there since before I moved in, but most of her clothes were still in the dresser. I stripped the bed, vacuumed, dusted. Then I got down on my knees and looked at the floor vent. The screws were scratched, not badly, just enough. The vent cover itself was slightly bent at one corner. I unscrewed it and lifted it out. The duct below was dark and smelled like soil. I shined my phone flashlight down into it. At the bottom, caught on the edge of the duct seam, there was a little piece of fabric, blue thread, maybe from one of the blankets, maybe from something else. I threw the vent cover away. I know that sounds pointless, but I could not stand looking at it. My mother never slept in that room again. She stayed in the recliner until we got her a hospital bed for the living room. After that, the living room became her bedroom. She lived another 11 months. Some days she was clear. Other days she drifted. She talked about my father like he was in the kitchen. She asked where her mother was. She forgot my brother had visited, but she never forgot the whispering. Once, in February, I found her staring at the hallway around 3 in the morning. I asked if she needed the bathroom. She said no. I asked if she was hurting. She said no. Then she said, "He's not under there now." I told her no, he was not. She looked at me and said, "But he knows where we sleep." I did not know what to say to that, so I sat with her until she fell asleep. After she died, my brother and I sold the house. We disclosed the crawl space repairs, but not the reason for them. I do not know if we were supposed to. The realtors said, unless there had been a death or an active police matter, we did not need to go into detail. A young couple bought it. They had a toddler and a dog. They loved the backyard. They said the neighborhood seemed safe. On the day we handed over the keys, I walked through the house alone one last time. It was empty then. No furniture, no curtains, no television humming in the living room. Every sound felt too clear. My footsteps on the hardwood, the refrigerator clicking, a car passing outside. I stood in the hallway near my mother's old bedroom and listened. I don't know what I expected. Nothing happened. Of course, nothing happened. The crawl space had a new door. The vents were secured. The locks were changed. The cameras were still mounted outside for the new owners. Everything that could reasonably be done had been done. Before I left, I went out back. The patio was clean. The trash cans had been lined up neatly by the wall. The new porch light was on, even though it was afternoon. I looked at the bathroom window, then at the laundry room window, then at the crawl space door. For a few seconds I had a very strong memory of being a kid in that same yard, daring myself to run past the crawl space opening without looking at it. I locked the back door from inside, walked out through the front, and gave the keys to the realtor. I have not driven by the house since, but about 6 months after the sale, I got a message on Facebook from the woman who bought it. She said she was sorry to bother me. She said they loved the house. She said everything was fine. Then she asked if we had ever had trouble with the back porch light. I read the message 3 or 4 times. I did not answer right away. I set my phone down and walked around my apartment for a while. Then I typed that it was an old fixture and we had replaced it before selling. She replied almost immediately. She said yes, they knew. She said her husband had checked it. The bulb was fine. The wiring was fine. But twice that week, they had gone outside in the morning and found it loosened just enough to go dark. She added one more message after that, just a short one. She said their dog would not go near the laundry room at night. I stared at that message until the screen dimmed. Then I wrote back and told her to call the sheriff's office. I told her to have someone check the crawl space. I told her not to wait. She saw the message. She never replied. A few weeks later, her Facebook page disappeared or she blocked me. I still don't know which. I thought about calling the sheriff's office myself, but I had no real information. No emergency. No name of a suspect. No proof that anything was happening. Just a porch light. A dog. And a house I no longer owned. I try not to think about it now. Most days I succeed, but every once in a while, usually late at night, I remember the path under the bedrooms. That narrow, smooth line in the dirt, worn down by someone moving slowly, carefully, again and again. And I think about my mother lying awake in that house, listening to a voice come up through the floor. Not loud, not threatening, just close enough for her to know it was there, just close enough to hear it say our names. I worked night shift for almost 6 years before this happened. People always assume the hardest part is being awake when everyone else is asleep. For me, that was never really the problem. I liked the quiet. I liked driving to work when the roads were empty and leaving when the sun was just starting to come up. I liked grocery shopping at odd hours and not having to make small talk with neighbors. What I didn't like was coming home, not because of anything specific at first. Just the feeling of pulling into the driveway at 3:12 in the morning, turning off my headlights, and sitting there for a few seconds in the dark, looking at the windows of my apartment. I rented the downstairs unit of an old duplex on the east side of town. It was a 2-story house that had been split sometime in the 80s. the kind of place with painted-over outlets, uneven floors, and doors that didn't sit right in their frames. My unit had the front porch and the downstairs. The upstairs unit had a separate entrance through the side hallway, which you access from a door near the driveway. The two apartments didn't connect from inside, at least not in any way I was aware of. The rent was cheap. That mattered to me more than almost anything at the time. The landlord's name was Carl. He was in his late 60s and owned a few older properties around town. He wasn't great, but he wasn't terrible either. If something broke, he usually fixed it within a week. If it wasn't flooding or sparking, he took his time. When I moved in, there was a man living upstairs named Victor. I only met him twice. Once when I was carrying boxes in, and once when he was taking trash out. He was probably in his 50s, quiet, kept to himself. I worked nights. He seemed to work days. We didn't overlap much. The first few months were normal. Old house sounds, pipes ticking, the furnace kicking on, wood settling when the temperature changed. Sometimes I heard Victor walking around above me, but it wasn't excessive. Mostly just footsteps in the evening, the murmur of his TV, the dull scrape of a chair. I got used to it. Then, around the middle of January, I started hearing noises after I got home from work. Small noises. Not footsteps exactly, more like a soft shift in the ceiling. A faint creak above the hallway. A tap, then nothing. At first, I didn't think much of it. My shifts ended at 2:30 a.m., but after charting and giving report, I usually didn't get home until a little after 3. I'd come inside, lock the door, drop my bag on the kitchen chair, and stand there in my scrubs for a minute, trying to decide whether I was hungry enough to eat. That was when I'd hear it. A quiet sound from above me, not loud enough to scare me, just enough to make me stop moving and listen. I assumed it was Victor. I remember feeling slightly annoyed more than afraid. I thought maybe he had insomnia, or maybe he got up to use the bathroom when he heard my car pull in. The ceilings were thin, the walls were thin. Everything in that house seemed to carry sound. So I ignored it. For about 2 weeks, I ignored it, but the pattern became hard not to notice. It only happened after I came home. Not when I was getting ready to leave at 6 in the evening. Not on my days off when I was home overnight. Only after work. I'd come in around 3 a.m., lock the door, and within 10 or 15 minutes, I'd hear something above the ceiling, sometimes over the kitchen, sometimes over the short hallway outside my bedroom. Once directly over the bathroom while I was brushing my teeth. That time I actually looked up at the ceiling with the toothbrush still in my mouth. There was a slow creak, then a very light scrape, like someone had dragged the side of their shoe across old wood. I stood there for a while after that, listening. Nothing else happened. I finished brushing my teeth, checked the lock on my back door, and went to bed. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Night shift does things to your nerves. People don't talk about that much. You spend 12 hours under fluorescent lights, dealing with pain meds, call bells, confused patients, family members, codes, alarms, and everyone else's emergencies. Then you go home when the world is empty and try to sleep while your brain is still running. So when something feels off, it's easy to blame the shift. I did that for a while. I blamed the shift. I blamed the old house. I blamed Victor. The first time I actually complained was after a stretch of 3 nights in a row. I had come home exhausted, the kind of exhausted where your eyes burn and your hands feel clumsy. One of my patients had declined suddenly near the end of my shift, and I had spent most of the drive home replaying everything in my head. When I walked in, the house was cold. I remember that clearly. The thermostat said 64, but the floor felt much colder than that. I put my keys in the bowl by the door, took off my shoes, and went straight to the kitchen. I opened the fridge and stood there staring into it, not wanting anything inside. Then I heard something above me. A bump, not a creak. A bump. It wasn't loud, but it was solid. It sounded like weight shifting. I closed the fridge door slowly and looked at the ceiling. Another sound followed, a faint rustling, then a short scrape. I was too tired to be polite, and I snapped. I grabbed the broom from beside the fridge and hit the handle against the ceiling 3 times. Not hard enough to damage anything. Just enough to say, "Stop." Everything went quiet. I stood there with the broom in my hand, embarrassed almost immediately. I expected Victor to stomp back or yell something through the floor. He didn't. There was nothing. I waited a full minute before putting the broom away. That was the first time I felt something other than annoyance, because the silence after I hit the ceiling felt too deliberate. The next afternoon, I texted Carl. I wrote, "Hey, I know this is an old house, but the upstairs tenant has been making noise really late. Usually after 3 a.m., it sounds like moving around or dragging something. Can you ask him to keep it down?" Carl didn't answer right away. That was normal. He responded around 5:30, while I was sitting in my car outside the hospital before my shift. His message said, "Upstairs is empty. Victor moved out end of December." I stared at the text for a long time. Then I read it again. "Upstairs is empty. Victor moved out end of December." I typed, "Are you sure?" Then I deleted it. Of course he was sure. He owned the building. I sent, "I've been hearing noises above me at night." He replied, "Probably pipes or animals? I'll have Mike check." Mike was the maintenance guy. I had met him once when he came to fix the kitchen sink. He was in his 30s, friendly, always smelled like cigarettes and sawdust. I tried to tell myself Carl was right. Animals made sense. The house was old. The roof had soft spots. There were trees close to the second floor, squirrels, raccoons, mice. Something could have gotten in. That explanation helped for the first half of my shift. By 1 a.m., it stopped helping. All I could think about was the upstairs apartment being empty. I imagined the rooms above mine. Empty living room, empty bedroom, no furniture, no TV, no shoes by the door, just bare floors and closed blinds. And still, something moving at night. When I got home that morning, I parked in the driveway and didn't get out right away. I looked at the side entrance to the upstairs unit. There was no car, no lights. The porch bulb by the side door was burned out, and the hallway behind the small window looked completely black. I sat there until my car made that little automatic clicking sound it does after the engine cools. Then I got out and walked quickly to my front door. Inside, I locked the deadbolt and the chain. I checked the back door. Then I stood in the kitchen without turning on the overhead light, listening. The house was quiet. For about 20 minutes, nothing happened. I started to feel foolish. I changed out of my scrubs, put them in the hamper, washed my face, and made toast I didn't really want. I was standing at the counter, buttering it, when I heard the noise. It came from above the hallway this time, a slow, careful creak, then another. Then a sound I still remember exactly. Fabric sliding over wood. That's the closest way I can describe it. Like a sleeve or pant leg brushing against a floorboard. I didn't move. The butter knife was still in my hand. The sound stopped directly above the area outside my bedroom door. I waited. Nothing. I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually I put the knife down. I walked to the front door, unlocked it as quietly as I could, and stepped outside. I didn't bring my bag. I didn't bring my coat. I stood on the porch in a t-shirt in January, holding my phone, and called Carl. He didn't answer. I called again. No answer. I called Mike, because his number was still in my phone from the sink repair. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice rough and half asleep. I apologized immediately. I said I was sorry. I said I knew it was early. Then I told him what Carl had said, and that I was standing outside because I was hearing movement over my ceiling. There was a pause. Then Mike said, "Over your ceiling, or in the walls?" I said, "Ceiling." He asked, "You sure?" I said yes. He sighed, but not in an annoyed way, more like he was waking himself up. He said, "Go sit in your car with the doors locked. I'll be there in 20 minutes. That scared me more than anything else, not because he sounded panicked, because he didn't question me. I got in my car and locked it. I kept the engine off because I wanted to hear if anything happened. The street was quiet. A porch light glowed on the house across the road. Somewhere a dog barked once, then stopped. Every few minutes, I looked at the dark side entrance. I kept expecting to see someone come out. Nobody did. Mike arrived in a white pickup just before 4. He parked on the street and got out wearing jeans, boots, and a heavy jacket over a sweatshirt. He had a flashlight in one hand and a ring of keys in the other. He came to my car window and asked if I was okay. I said yes. He told me to stay outside while he checked the upstairs unit. I didn't argue. He unlocked the side entrance and went in. From where I sat, I could see the beam of his flashlight move behind the small frosted window in the hallway. Then it disappeared up the stairs. The house stayed quiet. A few minutes passed. Then Mike came back outside. He looked confused. He said, "Nobody's up there." I felt embarrassed again, even though I had heard what I heard. He must have seen my face because he added, "But come here a second." I got out of the car. We stood by the side entrance. He shined his flashlight into the shared hallway. I had never really paid attention to that hallway before. It was narrow, with cheap beige carpet on the stairs and an old smoke detector on the wall. There was a small landing before the stairs turned, and above that landing was a square attic hatch. I had noticed it before, but only in the way you notice things in passing. Mike pointed the flashlight up at it. The hatch was slightly open. Not much, maybe half an inch, but enough that one corner had dropped lower than the others. Mike said, "That shouldn't be like that." I asked if the attic connected to my ceiling. He said, "It's a shared attic over both units, mostly crawl space. You can't stand up in most of it." Then he looked at me and added, "Wait in the car." He called Carl after that. I watched him talk on the phone from the driveway. He kept looking up at the hatch through the open doorway. Carl showed up about 30 minutes later, wearing a coat over pajamas and looking irritated until Mike said something to him quietly. After that, Carl stopped looking irritated. They both went inside. Mike brought a ladder from his truck. Carl told me to stay outside. By then the sun was starting to lighten the sky, just a little that gray-blue color that makes everything look flat and tired. I had been awake for almost 22 hours, and I remember feeling detached from what was happening, like I was waiting for someone to tell me what the problem was so I could go to bed. They were inside for maybe 15 minutes. Then Carl came out and called the police. He didn't explain anything to me at first. He just stood on the driveway with his phone pressed to his ear, saying his name, the address, and that someone had been staying in the attic space of his rental property. My legs felt strange when I heard that. Not weak exactly, just not reliable. I sat down on the front steps. Mike came out a minute later. His face looked pale. I asked him what they found. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "There's bedding up there." That was all he said at first. The police arrived around 20 minutes later. 2 officers, one older, one younger. They spoke with Carl, then with Mike, then with me. I told them about the noises. I told them about Victor. I told them about the text where Carl said upstairs was empty. The older officer asked if I had seen anyone. I said no. He asked if anything had gone missing. I said I didn't think so. He asked if I lived alone. I said yes. I remember not liking how that sounded out loud. The officers went inside with Carl and Mike. One of them climbed into the attic. The other stayed in the hallway, shining his flashlight up through the hatch. I stood outside while they searched. It took longer than I expected. At some point, the younger officer came out and asked for my work schedule. I didn't understand what he meant. He asked what days I worked and what time I usually got home. I told him. He asked if my schedule was posted anywhere publicly. I said no. Then I remembered. At the hospital, we used paper schedules sometimes, even though most of it was online. The charge nurse would print weekly staffing sheets and leave them at the nurse's station. They had first names, shifts, unit assignments, nothing that would matter to most people. But if someone knew my last name or where I worked, it wouldn't be impossible to figure out when I was there. I asked why he wanted to know. He said, "We found a copy of a schedule." I said, "Where?" He didn't answer directly. He asked if I would recognize it. A few minutes later, he showed me a clear evidence bag. Inside was a folded piece of paper. I didn't need to read the whole thing. I saw the hospital logo in the corner. I saw my unit. I saw my first name highlighted in yellow. My shifts were circled in blue pen. Someone had written small notes in the margin. Not full sentences, just times. Leaves 6:10. Home 3:05 to 3:20. Off sun. I remember the older officer saying my name because I must have stopped responding. I don't remember sitting down, but I was sitting on the steps again. The rest came out slowly. Behind the insulation near the area above my hallway, they found a rolled sleeping bag, a pillow without a case, 2 water bottles, empty food wrappers, a phone charger, a small flashlight, and a plastic grocery bag filled with receipts and other trash. There were also cigarette butts in a glass jar, which was strange because I never smelled smoke. Mike said there was a narrow section of attic above my unit where the joists ran close enough that someone could lie down if they were careful. Not comfortably, not for long periods, he said, but long enough to sleep. There was no obvious damage to my ceiling, no hole, no vent removed, no hidden camera, at least none that they found. That should have made me feel better. It didn't, because the part that stayed with me was that whoever it was had been above me while I was home. Maybe only sometimes. Maybe only after I came back from work. But they had been close enough that I heard fabric move over my bedroom ceiling, close enough to hear me lock my door, close enough to know when I showered, when I cooked, when I went to bed. The police checked the upstairs unit. The door lock was intact. No broken windows. No signs that anyone had been living in the apartment itself. That seemed impossible to me until Mike explained the side hallway. The outer door to the shared stairwell had a lock, but the latch had been loose for a long time. If you pulled it hard enough, it didn't always catch. I had never used that entrance, so I never noticed. Victor probably hadn't either. From that hallway, someone could climb the stairs to the landing, push up the attic hatch, and disappear into the crawl space without ever entering the upstairs apartment. The police took a report. They dusted a few things, but nobody seemed confident. The older officer told me it was probably a transient person who found the hatch and used the attic as shelter. I asked about the schedule. He said, "That's concerning." That was the word he used. Concerning. He said they would look into it. They asked if I had any recent issues with patients, family members, co-workers, anyone who might know my schedule. I said no, but working in a hospital, especially nights, you deal with all kinds of people. Some are confused, some are angry, some are in withdrawal. Some remember your name when you wish they wouldn't. Some family members take things personally. Some security incidents don't feel serious at the time because nothing technically happened. I gave them the names of 2 people who had made me uncomfortable in the past few months. One was the adult son of a patient who had waited for me near the elevators after being told to leave. The other was a man who had come into the ER repeatedly looking for pain medication and once followed me to the parking garage because he thought I was someone else. Nothing came of either name. At least nothing anyone told me. Carl offered to put a padlock on the attic hatch. I think he expected that to solve it. I told him I wasn't staying there. He said he understood, but I could tell he was worried about rent and liability more than anything else. I didn't go back inside alone. My friend Marissa came over after her shift ended and helped me pack a bag. Mike stood in the hallway while we were inside. I remember him apologizing more than once, even though it wasn't his fault. When I went into my bedroom, I couldn't look up. That sounds childish, but I couldn't. I kept my eyes on the dresser, the closet, the bed. I packed uniforms, underwear, medication, phone charger, laptop. Marissa asked if I wanted my pillow. I said no. I stayed with her for 10 days. During that time, the police called me twice. The first time was to ask more questions about my schedule. The second was to tell me they had no identified suspect. They said the receipts found in the attic were from 3 different convenience stores within a few miles. Mostly food, cigarettes, batteries. A couple were cash purchases. One had the last 4 digits of a card, but they said that didn't lead anywhere useful. They never found the person, or if they did, no one told me. I broke my lease. Carl didn't fight me on it. My brother and Marissa helped me move out during daylight. We took almost everything, but I threw away more than I should have. Bedding, shower curtain, rugs, anything that made me think of someone listening above it. While we were moving, I looked at the attic hatch in the side hallway. Carl had put a padlock on it by then. He also installed a new lock on the outer door. It looked secure. It looked normal. That somehow made it worse, because if I had seen it that way when I first moved in, I would have felt safe. And maybe for months, I was. I don't know when the person first got in. I don't know if they started staying there before Victor moved out, or after. I don't know if Victor ever heard anything and ignored it the way I did. I don't know if the person chose my building because it was easy, or because of me. That's the part I still go back to. The schedule. People like to offer comforting explanations. They say maybe it was found in the trash, maybe it blew out of someone's bag, maybe whoever was up there collected random papers and mine just happened to be one of them. But that doesn't explain the notes. Leaves 6:10. Home 3:05 to 3:20. Off sun. Those weren't printed. Someone wrote those down. Someone watched long enough to know. After I moved, I changed units at work, same hospital, different floor. I asked not to have my schedule posted on paper. Most people understood when I explained why. A few thought I was overreacting, but nobody said that to my face. For a while, I stopped working nights. I lasted about 3 months on days before I went back. Night shift is hard to leave once your life is built around it. But I changed a lot of habits. I don't park in the same place every day. I don't wear my badge outside the building. I don't tell patients what days I'll be back unless I have to. When I get home, I wait in my car and look at the windows before I go in. I live in an apartment complex now. 3rd floor, no attic, no shared crawl space. Solid concrete between units, according to the property manager, though I don't know how much I believe that. Sometimes I still hear noises above me. Normal apartment noises. A chair moving. A toilet flushing. Someone's dog crossing the floor. Most nights, I can ignore it. But every once in a while, usually after a bad shift, I'll come home around 3 in the morning, set my keys down, and hear a small sound overhead. Just one creak, or a faint shift. And for a second, I'm back in that duplex, standing in my kitchen with a butter knife in my hand, listening to someone listening to me. I never found out who was in the attic. I never found out how they got my schedule. And I never found out what they were waiting for. I worked maintenance for an apartment complex on the east side of town for almost 6 years. It wasn't a luxury place. It wasn't run down either. It was one of those older 3-story buildings from the late 70s. Brown brick outside, long hallways, coin laundry in the basement. The kind of place where you could hear your upstairs neighbor drop a phone charger, but not always make out what people were saying. Most of my job was boring, clogged sinks, broken garbage disposals, furnace filters, leaking toilet tanks, closet doors off track, people locking themselves out. Sometimes we got animal calls too. Mice in the wall, squirrels in the attic space, a bird trapped in a dryer vent. So when the office gave me a work order about scratching behind a bedroom wall, I didn't think much of it. The tenant's name was Claire. She lived in 214. I had done work in her unit a couple times before. Nothing major, once for a slow drain, once for a loose outlet cover. She was quiet, polite, mid-20s maybe, worked some kind of office job, I think, because she was usually dressed like she had just come from one. The note on the work order said, repeated scratching sound behind bedroom wall, mostly at night. Tenant concerned about animal. That was it. I remember seeing that and thinking, probably a mouse. Maybe a pipe expanding. The building had old copper lines, and in the winter they could make all kinds of ticking and scraping noises when hot water ran through them. I grabbed my tool bag, a flashlight, and one of the little inspection cameras we used for wall cavities. Then I went up to the 2nd floor. It was around 3 in the afternoon. Claire answered after the second knock. She looked tired. Not sick exactly, just like she hadn't slept well in a while. She said, "Thanks for coming." I told her no problem and asked her to show me where she'd been hearing it. She led me down the short hall to her bedroom. The apartment layout was simple. Living room and kitchen in front. Bedroom and bathroom in the back. Her bedroom shared a wall with the unit next door, 216. That wall also had plumbing and electrical running through a vertical service chase. In older buildings like that, there's often a narrow space between units where pipes, wires, and ductwork run from floor to floor. You're not supposed to access it from inside the apartments. There were small locked panels in the hallway and basement for maintenance. The sound, she said, came from the wall behind her bed. Her bed had been moved away from it by about a foot. I noticed that right away. Most people don't move their bed unless something has really started bothering them. She pointed to an area about chest height on the wall. It's usually right there, she said. I asked what it sounded like. She said, like nails, or something dragging lightly. Then she paused and added, not all the time, just sometimes. I asked if it was rhythmic, like tapping, or if it happened when the heat came on. She shook her head. No. It's more like someone trying to be quiet. That was the first thing she said that felt different from a normal pest call. I didn't react much. You learn not to. If someone is worried, the worst thing you can do is make a face. I just nodded and said we'd check it out. I got close to the wall and listened. Nothing. I pressed my ear to a few spots. Still nothing. I ran the water in the bathroom sink to see if the pipes made noise. There was a faint clicking inside the wall, but nothing like scratching. I checked the baseboards for gaps. I looked in the closet. I checked behind the dresser. No droppings. No smell. No chewed carpet. Nothing that pointed to rodents. Claire stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. After a minute she said, I know it sounds stupid. I told her it didn't. Older buildings make noise, but that didn't mean she wasn't hearing something. She seemed relieved by that. I asked how long it had been going on. She said, a few months. That surprised me. The work order made it sound like a recent thing. I asked if she'd put in a request before. She said she had called the office twice, but both times it stopped for a while, so she told them not to worry about it. Then it came back. I asked if it happened only at night. She said mostly, but sometimes early morning too. I asked if it seemed to happen when the neighbor in 216 was home. She said she didn't know. The unit next door was vacant. That part made me stop for a second. I knew 216 had been empty since the last tenant moved out around 2 months earlier. We had been using it occasionally for storing extra blinds and old appliances until it got turned over. I asked her if the sound had started before or after that tenant moved out. She thought about it. Before, she said, but it got worse after. I wrote that down, not because I thought it mattered yet, just because it was odd. I told her I wanted to check the access panel in the hallway. She asked if she could come with me. I said that was fine. The hallway access door for that chase was around the corner, between 214 and 216 Peen. It was a small metal door, about 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall, set low into the wall. It had a utility lock on it. Maintenance had the key. It opened into a vertical chase that ran behind both units. It wasn't a room, not even a proper closet, just a service space. I knelt down and put the key in. Before I turned it, I noticed the door wasn't fully shut. The latch was in place, but the bottom edge sat out maybe a quarter inch. Old doors warp, so that alone didn't mean much. I pulled gently. It didn't open. Then I turned the key. The latch clicked. When I pulled again, the door moved, but only about an inch. Something was holding it from inside. I thought maybe a wire had fallen across it, or insulation was packed against it. I told Claire to step back a little, because there might be dust or something loose. Then I pulled harder. The door opened another 2 inches and stopped. I shined my flashlight through the gap. At first I only saw pipes, a vertical drain line, some electrical conduit, dust. Then I saw a strip of wood pressed against the inside of the door. It had been wedged diagonally between the door and the framing, not fallen, placed. I didn't say that out loud. I just stared at it for a second. Claire asked, "What is it?" I said. "Looks like something's blocking it." My voice sounded normal, but I remember feeling a very specific kind of unease. Not fear exactly. More like the moment when you realize the problem is not the kind of problem you were sent to fix. I set my tool bag down. I used my pry bar to push the strip of wood inward. It fell away with a soft clatter. The door opened. The smell came out first. Not strong. Not rotten. Just stale. like clothes that had been worn too many days and kept in a closed closet. The service space was dark, narrow, and dusty. There were pipes and wiring running vertically, with horizontal gaps between studs and old drywall backs. A person could fit in there if they were thin and didn't mind being cramped, but it was not a place anyone should be. I crouched and shined the light in. At first, I still didn't see him. That bothers me when I think about it. He was close enough that if I had reached my arm in, I might have touched him. He was tucked back to the left, behind the main drain line, sitting with his knees pulled against his chest. He had one hand up near his face, like he was blocking the light. For about half a second, my brain tried to make him into a pile of trash bags. Then he moved. I said, "Hey." That was all I could get out. He didn't answer. Claire was behind me. I stood up fast and put my hand out without looking at her. "Go back in your apartment," I said. She asked what was wrong. I said it again, louder. "Go inside and lock the door." That time she listened. I heard her footsteps, then her apartment door shut. The man in the chase started moving. Not fast. He seemed stiff. He tried to shift deeper into the space, but there wasn't anywhere to go. The chase narrowed behind him, and there were pipes in the way. I backed into the hall and pulled out my phone. I called 911. While I was on the phone, I kept the flashlight on the opening. The dispatcher asked if he had a weapon. I said I didn't know. She asked if I was safe. I said I was in the hallway, and he was in a wall. That sounded absurd when I said it, but it was the truth. The man didn't speak during the call. He just sat there breathing. I could hear him, slow at first, then faster. I told him the police were coming and that he needed to stay where he was. He said something then. It was very quiet. I couldn't make it out. I told him to repeat it. He didn't. A couple tenants opened their doors to see what was happening. I told them to go back inside. One of them asked if there was a fire. I said no. Then I called my property manager. Her name was Denise. She was in the leasing office downstairs. I told her to come up, but not alone. She came with our other maintenance guy, Rob. By then I had stepped farther back, keeping the access door in view. Rob took one look inside and said, "What the hell?" Denise didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me. I remember her face going flat, like she already understood this was going to be bad for the property. The police got there in maybe 8 minutes. 2 officers came upstairs. They had to ask the man several times to come out. He didn't fight them. That's important. There was no big struggle, no yelling, no chase. He crawled out slowly, one knee at a time, covered in dust and insulation fibers. He was probably in his late 30s. Maybe older, thin, unshaven. His sweatshirt had dark stains at the cuffs. He had a backpack with him, but he tried to leave it inside the chase. One of the officers noticed and pulled it out. They put him in handcuffs and sat him against the hallway wall. He kept looking at Claire's door, not at the police. Not at us. At her door. That was the part I couldn't stop noticing. His expression wasn't wild. He didn't look angry. He looked embarrassed, like he'd been caught doing something private. The officers asked if anyone knew him. Nobody did. Denise asked if he was one of the contractors from the last turnover. He wasn't. Rob said he had never seen him. I had never seen him either. But later, when I thought back, I remembered a man smoking near the dumpster a few weeks earlier. Same build. Same gray sweatshirt, maybe. At the time I assumed he was visiting someone. At a complex with over 100 units, you don't question every unfamiliar face. One officer knocked on Claire's door. She opened it with the chain on. He spoke to her quietly. I didn't hear all of it. I just heard her say, "From the wall," then nothing. The officer asked if she could come downstairs and give a statement. She said yes, but she needed a minute. While they waited, the second officer asked us about the service chase. I explained the layout. The chase ran from the basement up through all 3 floors. There were access points in the basement, the second-floor hallway, and a locked utility room on the 3rd floor. The basement access was supposed to be secured with a padlock. The officer asked if it was. I said it had been last time I checked, but I couldn't remember when that was. That's another thing that stayed with me. How many maintenance checks blur together? How many locks you assume are still locked because they were locked last month? After the man was taken out of the hallway, Rob and I had to open the chase fully. The police wanted to see how far it went and whether anyone else was inside. I didn't want to go in, but I did. There wasn't enough space to stand. You had to crouch and turn sideways. The floor of the chase was really just framing and old plywood platforms at each level. Some areas had dust so thick you could see every handprint. And there were handprints. Not old ones. Fresh smears through gray dust. There were also marks on the backside of Claire's bedroom wall. At first they looked like random scratches. Then I got closer. They were small lines clustered near the spot above where her bed had been. Some were from screws or nails. Some looked like they had been made by something metal dragged lightly across the drywall. Not enough to break through, just enough to make sound. I found a butter knife wedged between two pipes. The handle was wrapped with electrical tape. I remember that detail because it felt so ordinary. A butter knife. Something from a kitchen drawer. Not a weapon exactly. Just a tool. There was also an empty water bottle, 2 granola bar wrappers, a rolled-up blanket, and a phone charger plugged into an exposed outlet that should not have been live. That outlet had been installed years before for work lights, according to Rob. I didn't even know it still had power. The police photographed everything. One of them asked how long someone could stay in there. I said I didn't know, not comfortably. But if they were determined, maybe hours at a time. Maybe overnight. It was warm because of the pipes. There was enough space to sit. And if they knew when to move, they could get in and out without being noticed. The basement access was the next thing we checked. The padlock was still there, but it was locked through the hasp without actually catching the staple. From a distance, it looked secured. Up close, you could pull the whole thing open. That made me feel sick, not because I knew I had done it. I don't know who did, but because I had walked past that door probably 50 times, maybe more. And I never pulled on the lock. The basement door opened into a larger utility area. From there, the man could climb up into the vertical chase and move between floors. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. The next day, Denise told me not to talk to tenants about it. She said police were handling it. She also said corporate would be sending someone. By noon, everyone in the building knew anyway. People always know. One tenant had seen the police bring the man out. Another had taken a picture from the stairwell. The story changed every time it was repeated. Some said he was living in the walls. Some said he had been there for weeks. Some said he had keys to every unit. I didn't know what was true, but I knew enough. A few days later, I had to go back into Claire's unit to patch the inspection holes and check the wall for damage. She was there with her older brother. He stood in the living room the whole time, arms folded. I didn't blame him. Claire looked different. Not better or worse, just very still. She asked me if I had a minute. I said yes. Her brother stayed nearby, but she was the one who talked. She said she had been complaining for months that something felt wrong in the apartment. Not just the scratching. Other things. She said there were nights when she came home late from work and heard a faint shift in the wall after she turned on the bedroom light. She thought it was pipes? Then she started noticing that the scratching only happened when she was alone. If her boyfriend came over, nothing. If her brother stayed the night, nothing. But if she was alone, usually after 10 or 11, it would start. Light at first, then closer to the headboard. She said she had stopped sleeping in the bedroom some nights. She slept on the couch with the TV on. Then the sound moved. She heard it behind the living room wall once. That was when she called the office the second time. I asked if she told them that part. She said she tried, but she could hear herself sounding crazy, so she softened it. She said maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was the pipes. Maybe she was just tired. I didn't know what to say. I had heard people complain about noises before. A lot of tenants think every sound is something serious. Most of the time it isn't. But because most of the time it isn't, you get used to treating it that way. That's what I regret. Not that I ignored her directly. I didn't even know the full story, but the system did what it always does. It turned a woman saying, "Something is wrong," into possible pest issue. Claire told me there were other things too. Her bedroom window faced the parking lot. She lived on the second floor, so she never worried much about it, but she had started closing her blinds all the time because she felt watched. She said once when she came home early from work, she heard a noise behind the wall as soon as she unlocked the door, not after she walked in, as soon as the key turned, like someone inside the wall had been waiting to hear it. Another time, she was on the phone with her mom in the bedroom. She mentioned that she was going to shower and go to bed. A few minutes later, while she was in the bathroom, she heard the scratching start behind the bedroom wall. That was when she first thought somebody might be listening. She told the leasing office she didn't feel safe. They suggested she file a noise complaint if she thought it was a neighbor, but the unit next door was empty by then, so she didn't, she said. I kept telling myself there had to be a normal explanation. I told her I was sorry. It wasn't enough, but it was the only honest thing I had. Her brother asked me how someone could get into the wall. I showed him the hallway panel, then the basement access. He got angry when he saw the lock. Again, I didn't blame him. He asked how long it had been like that. I said I didn't know. He asked who had keys. I said maintenance, management, some contractors. He asked if the man had worked for the property. I said not that I knew of. That was true, but I could tell none of my answers helped. A week later, we found out a little more, not from the police directly, from Denise, who heard it from the property owner's attorney. The man had been arrested for trespassing and burglary-related charges. There may have been more later. I never followed the court case closely. I didn't want to see his face again. He had no lease in the complex, no listed connection to any tenant, but he had lived nearby at some point. There was an old address on his ID from a building 2 blocks away. The police found several things in his backpack: a flashlight, gloves, a cheap prepaid phone, food wrappers, a small notebook, and a set of printed floor plans, not official blueprints, just evacuation maps from the building, the kind posted near stairwells. On one of them, some areas had been marked in pen: utility doors, stairwells, laundry room, the wall behind Claire's bedroom. I was told her first name was written once in the notebook, just her first name. There were also notes about times, not full sentences, just things like home 6:40, lights out 12:15, car gone Saturday, brother stayed. I don't know how many entries there were. I don't know if those exact words are all right. That's just what Denise told us, but I believed it because when I cleaned out the service chase after the police released it, I found cigarette ash in a spot that faced the parking lot through a tiny gap near an exterior vent. From there, if you put your eye close enough, you could see part of the lot. Not much, but enough to see Claire's car. Enough to know if it was there. That detail made the whole thing feel less like he had stumbled into a hiding place. He had chosen it. He had figured it out over time. He had learned the building better than some of the people paid to maintain it. After that, corporate sent a contractor to seal every Chase access panel with new locks. They installed cameras in the basement and at the side entrances. They sent letters to tenants about unauthorized access to a restricted maintenance area. That was the wording. Unauthorized access. It sounded like someone had parked in the wrong spot. Claire moved out before the end of the month. I saw her once on moving day. Her brother and 2 other guys were carrying boxes. She avoided looking at the hallway access panel. I would have too. I told her I hoped she found somewhere better, she said. Me too. Then she thanked me. That bothered me. I didn't feel like I had done anything worth thanking. I had opened a door, that was all. For a while after, I checked every utility lock in the building twice a week. I pulled on them hard. I opened panels I hadn't opened in years. I crawled into spaces I used to ignore. I found normal things: dust, mouse droppings, old cable wire, a dead bird in a vent. Nothing like what we found in that chase. But I never really trusted the walls again. That sounds dramatic, and I don't mean it that way. Walls are not solid in apartment buildings. people think they are. They look solid because they're painted and decorated and you put furniture against them. But behind them, there are gaps, shared spaces, pipes, openings, maintenance paths, places meant for wires and air and water. Most of them are too small for a person. Some aren't. And even when they are locked, they're only as secure as the last person who checked. I kept working there for another year. Then I left property maintenance altogether. Not just because of that, but it was part of it. There were other reasons: bad pay, on-call weekends, tenants yelling about things I couldn't fix. But after Claire's apartment, I started noticing how often people dismissed things because they were inconvenient to take seriously. A smell, a sound, a feeling that someone had been inside. Most of the time there's a boring explanation. A raccoon, a loose pipe, a neighbor's TV, a draft under a door. But not always. Sometimes the explanation is boring in a different way. A man with time, a weak lock, a building with blind spots, a tenant nobody wanted to scare. I still think about the scratching sound. I never heard it myself, not the way Claire did. I only saw the marks afterward, small, careful scratches on the backside of the drywall, made close to where her head would have been when she tried to sleep. I think about how lightly he must have done it, just enough for her to hear, just enough to make her wonder, then stop when someone else came over. That's the part that stays with me most. Not that he was hiding there, not even that he was listening. It's that he knew when not to make a sound, and for months that made him easier to ignore.